forward.
All right, good morning, good morning. Welcome to your monthly community of practice. All of you are rolling out customized discovery. And today we are moving into stage 3. We're gonna do a bit of a recap. Just a quick reminder, please go ahead and mute yourself. We will have time, hopefully, for discussion and breakout groups today. We did not record this the last time, so there is some recap just for folks to be able to have a bit of everything kind of in one recording for this month. So Jess and I will be your co-captains today, and Vienna is here as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So what are we going to do today? Quick review of what we're doing, right? Because it's only February, and a couple of reminders of kind of how we get into the flow of services. Y'all are working your tails off in a workforce crisis. So anytime we are also in crisis as a field, and personally, because you're carrying more than probably usual, things feel a little overwhelming, right? So a lot of things are just reminders until they become natural in our workflow. So we'll go ahead and recap stage 1 and stage 2 of discovery. We'll go into stage 3 with some new content, and then we're gonna break up into groups for an activity. So here's our recap. This is just your funding breakout so that it is in our content today. So I'll pause quick. If anybody has any authorization questions that have occurred, let's talk about those now. And Jess, are you going to monitor the chat?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay. All right. Great.
All right.
Let's talk about your support. So the cool thing about this year and jumping on the customized discovery bandwagon is that you have technical assistance support that are paid for by VR. So Jess and Corey mainly, and myself on a few, we want to connect with you bi-weekly and share progress, brainstorm, identify next steps. I highly recommend that you just set a reoccurring meeting that even goes 15 minutes, 30 minutes at the very most. And the intent of this is just to touch base and say, here's where I'm at, here's the questions that I have. Jess or Corey or Ashley, now what do I do in the next 2 weeks with this, right? So also we would always want to invite VR counselors to that if it's reoccurring. We also know that counselor schedules get oftentimes set a month in advance. So they may not be able to join, but the invitation always stands, right? So also your groups, your breakout groups in the community of practice also we're consciously putting you in breakout groups with your region so that you can also use that time to share progress, to brainstorm, to identify those next steps. At a minimum, please make sure that you are sending your discovery staging record to your identified TA person at least once a month. And know that this is not intended to be a critical, icky feeling review. It's really a way to teach you how to document in a way that we haven't really in our field. It's not Medicaid documentation. So I don't know about any of you, but if any of you learn by example or seeing things, that's a nice way to get that feedback, or to have Jess give you an example of how you might write about the home visit in a different way. So please make sure that you're sending that regularly, and at the very minimum once a month. So last month we talked about stage 1 and stage 2. The goal was that by today you have stage 1 and stage 2 of customized discovery completed with the individual that you're working with, and that you've sent that to Jess and Corey for their review. Updates. So this is where, Vienna, if you want to jump in to talk about customized discovery and transition age youth.
Sure. So we have the service available for students. The service is available for high school students who are in their final year of high school with MSD, most significantly disabled. I apologize if I use any acronyms, and I know some of you are not as familiar with the acronyms, so just call my attention. I'll say the whole thing. But yeah, and what we're looking at for those who are applying customized discovery for students is a high level of communication. So, for example, when Ashley said, make sure that you send at least the DSR to your counselor that is working with you on a monthly basis, you want to include the school staff as well. And so that's the real key thing about providing services with a student, is making sure that while they are in high school, you're providing communication, whether it's in a written or meeting format, in person or verbal format. We have to include the school staff. And when I say school staff, I'm referring to LEA, AEA, if they're involved, and the special ed teacher and so forth. So making sure that you're including them in that journey every step of the way. We want to make sure that they, as in the school side, is also supporting you all in making sure that you have access to the student as needed. So that decision was made last Thursday, I believe, and so everyone is able to use it with the student population going forward. The service is not applicable for pre-employment transition service hours. It is counted as employment services. So then when you are working with a student, the goal would be competitive integrative employment, right? For that first 90 days, especially that first 3 months while you're doing discovery. And by the time that they are going to roll into the customized job development, we will have a formulated career goal, and that amendment should be reflected on the IEP too. So that way, that reflects everything that the job developer is going to be utilizing in terms of the DSR to help with job development. There's one more thing I wanted to say. Oh, yes. And of course, if you're working with students, when you get towards the end there, we cannot close them out at minimum at least 90 days after they have officially graduated high school and stabilized, of course.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. Any questions about utilizing customized discovery for transition age students?
Yes. This is Christine. Can you guys hear me?
Hi, Christine.
Hello. So, I found some information on the IVRS website, and it says that, I'm just not quite sure how to go about, because I do have a high school student that I'm working with, and I guess I just don't know how to truly proceed with her. I went to her home, and we chit-chatted for a little bit. Like, I introduced myself, found out her likes, her dislikes, that sort of thing, but nobody else here in the office has actually used the process that we're supposed to be using with high school students. So how does that look like?
Meaning using, like, what does using customized discovery with high school students look like?
No, I think it's
For the funding.
I was going to say, Christine, did you guys go ahead with career exploration in place of
you.
customized discovery?
yes,
So she
yes.
was kind of trying to utilize career exploration and maybe utilize some of the tenets or strategies of customized discovery within that service. And talk to Jill about it, right? You and Jill have had a discussion about it. So that's kind of the context or the framing of where she was coming from. So she utilized that in place of discovery. And I think are you asking maybe where to go next, or kind of what to do next, or if this folds into that at all, or?
So I can chime in here a little bit too. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Jill.
Hi.
So yeah, so this is one of the cases where we were getting ready to start with customized discovery when Voc Rehab put the halt on everything. So instead of halting, we kind of pieced together some menu of service items to keep things moving with this young lady. But now that we have this great news that we can do customized discovery with our high school seniors, she falls into that category. So I think, Chris, you and I can have a conversation of maybe wrapping up the services that we started and seeing if customized discovery is now the good service that we should be moving forward with her.
Okay, so we can, so I guess I was just confused then. So we can go ahead with the normal customized.
I'll reach out to
discovery
you
process.
and we can kind of talk about what's
Okay.
been done and where we're at, and then talk about, if we want to proceed with the customized discovery, if that still makes sense for her.
Okay,
Does that answer your
Perfect.
question?
yes, it does.
Okay, perfect.
Excellent. Cool. Thank you. So it sounds like that is kind of an isolated scenario. So we'll handle that on the side. Deanna, there was a question from Cindy.
Jill, I actually appreciate you saying that, because it does tie to what a little bit in terms of what Cindy, I think it was Cindy that was asking. And thank you for reminding me on that. I should have said something about that. When you are working with the schools, we still have an MOA, a memorandum of agreement with the schools, right? The Department of Ed. So that takes precedence over customized discovery. So anything that a school would normally be responsible for providing, we want to continue to follow that, right? So that's why we say there has to be a high level of communication with the schools, because we want to take a look and see what they are responsible for first. And we want to follow that.
David, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, my question is, you mentioned they have to be a senior. Does it have to be decided? Because sometimes someone's a senior, but then they may decide to go a fifth year. Do they have to make that decision whether they're going to do a fifth year? So really, it's not really their last year, or how does that work out?
Yeah, that's a really good question, David. So the idea is they're able to utilize customized discovery in their final year in high school. So obviously, we want to have that decision where they're going into their senior year, and we know that customized discovery would be a good fit. But sometimes we know that that decision of going into that fifth year program isn't made until like maybe later in the spring of their senior year, right? And so in that situation, then we would end customized discovery and then follow any menu of services at that point.
So if somebody goes into a senior plus program, they would end discovery?
Yeah, we would have to end discovery.
Why?
Because we don't know how long they're going to be in that senior plus program, and they could potentially be in it for up to they're 21, right? So, but if they are, so then we would end discovery and then support the person in doing that fifth year program. And then hopefully by then, though, more than likely, they have probably completed discovery or the first part of the milestone already, right? Because the idea is they're going to be doing 3 months of discovery, and by the time they're in their their senior springtime rolls around, right? they're probably more than likely in that discovery mode, or not the discovery. My words are all jumbled up. The job development period, and so.
Could we come back? Maybe we need to put this one in the parking lot, because to me, you wouldn't want to. There would still be a benefit to completing discovery in a Senior Plus program, or if they're transitioning to a Senior Plus program, you would use what you've learned in discovery to then guide what you're doing in your Senior Plus program, to me, rather than ending it. It also wouldn't be an incentive to the provider to end it without finishing it, because then they wouldn't have access to the outcome payment.
Yeah, we can put this in our parking lot, but right now, from what Mary and our bureau chief has discussed, because we're not sure how long they're going to be in that 5th year program, because they could potentially be in it for 3 years, right? We don't want to keep them because the idea is to have them go through the whole process for 3 months and then spend another 3 months in job development. I think there needs to be some things that are ironed out in there.
Yeah, I think this is still a muddy area. So the good news is, one, right now you can access customized discovery as transition age youth if you meet the MSD qualification and you're in your last year of high school, and we'll come back with cleaner guidance around the Senior Plus program.
Can I add something on that?
Yeah, Alice, go ahead.
I think my thoughts, because Cindy, I saw you commented, like, how does this mesh with like instructional training as well? Like, where do we draw the line on that? And I think one of my concerns was saying it absolutely has to be that last year. I mean, Vienna, I don't know if you guys are kind of worried about then, like, how do you switch if discovery and you find a good placement, do we switch back to the school taking on the instructional training? I mean, I guess in my opinion, it's always been, if they get placed, even if it's not their very last year at school, you can still cover the supported employment if it's in their goal area. So I don't know why we would absolutely have to stop, because if we do discovery, we find a good placement, they're still in the Senior Plus program, they get placed, we do support employment. I mean, the goal isn't to keep them in school till they're 21. The goal is to get them out after they've met their goals. So I don't know. I just feel like if they got placed and we weren't really sure, maybe instructional training would step back in, but we would still be part of the discussion and part of the team with the school. But if we did a really good discovery and we got them placed, ideally then VR would continue with supporting the job coaching, and they'd move away from instructional training.
Right, if that was the situation. But I think the question is, what happens if they are going into a 5th year program, and what do we do with customized discovery then? If they haven't gotten a job yet, right?
This is Bronna, and I just have something to say. I've worked with the high schools before, and we kind of ran into this when I was working, that when do we start the discovery process and that type of thing. And at that time, we could not be funded. There couldn't be services while they were under the umbrella of the school or the school programs. But we did discovery initially, and customized discovery, it was customized discovery initially through the school. And then we had a gentleman that actually ended up getting a job. And then the conversation took place of who provides the job coaching, since he's decided he's going to go into the 5th year senior. And so the school district, because he was under that umbrella during that time, were the ones that were responsible for the job coaching. But I also had other people, and he's still working. He went to school and he's still working. I had other family members that we started discovery, and we did discovery, and then we were told we could not be funded and we could not continue to meet. And the options we had was we did career exploration during the summer when they were in school. The problem with that was, number one, you had parents that were mad when they found out that come fall, we were not be able to continue the employment process. But we also put our clients in, or our job seekers in a situation where I have this trusted relationship built with this employment specialist, and now they're going to walk away too. And I think at some point, you know, we have to consider what are the effects of that as well. Parents were very angry about it. So I think, like you said, this is something that really needs to be kind of reviewed, because there's really no reason why the customized discovery process couldn't continue while somebody's in school. You know, it gives us another place to see them as well, but also it keeps us so that we're maintaining those relationships with the individual's team. And I think that's important as well. That's it. Just my
This
opinion.
is Jill, and I just wanted to weigh in on a couple things. I think this is a great topic that we're discussing, and kind of want to echo a couple of things that Alice said. You know, it's a little bit different if we're talking about a 5th-year program going to Iowa Lakes or to DMAC, the SAVE or the STRIVE. I think that's kind of a different 5th-year category. If we're talking about our students that are going to our local high schools for their 5th-year program, you know, we work really closely with them on building employment into their day, and, you know, having employment be part of that. You know, a lot of times the schools are still working on functional skills during those 5th-year programs. So we kind of blend and combine that functional stuff that they're going back to the school building for, along with the employment services. I would hope, you know, kind of back to if they're a traditional senior and we decide, you know, in good faith to start discovery, I would hope that, you know, that's a great discovery and that gets completed. Maybe sometime during that or at the end, they decide they're going to go back for a 5th-year program. And then we just take what we've learned through this great discovery and provide those employment services that we can blend into that 5th year, you know, moving forward with job development and all of that. So just my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback, because I know when we discussed this, we did not consider that. So I will take this back to talk with Richard and Mary, and then we'll iron it out some more.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Vienna. And Jess and I would be happy to participate if we could. That would be great. I'm wondering, I know a lot of our conversations have been focused on transition, and so I'm hoping that maybe our next community of practice, we could just focus on transition, right? And maybe we talk about the different types of 5-year programs and where customized discovery would fit in, just as, you know, kind of Jill and Alice talked about, and really just kind of dive into this transition piece, because I think it's muddy and unknown for a lot of us, and it's happening in different ways, and how can we just kind of devote an entire hour and a half to transition? I don't know what others' thoughts are on that, but if you want to just drop it in the chat and we can put all those questions in the parking lot. David.
Yeah, I'm sorry to bring up, I mean, there's just a lot involved. My fear was that if tomorrow I get a referral of someone that's a senior, and let's say tomorrow I get the referral, and in a couple of weeks we're going to meet, and then we get the ball rolling, and then, you know, a good team is going to be meeting, you know, spring or early spring, and then they decide that they're going to go for a 5th year, which, as you say, could be longer. I mean, I just want the parent to know what's the repercussions of deciding to go on that 5th year, and their partnership with adult providers. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we don't necessarily have answers. If you get those referrals, I think making sure that you connect with your counselor, the team, and have a conversation before we have guidance and clarity, that would be important. Does that sound okay? All right. Love transition. Always good stuff. All right, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here. This is just a recap of our schedule. Just a reminder, if you have not turned in stage 1 and stage 2 of your discovery staging record to your TA person, please make sure that you do that, and include the counselor so that they're part of that team conversation as well. Today, we're going to talk about stage 3 and stage 4. So the goal would be by the end of, or not, we're in the middle of February, not the end of February. So by our next community of practice that you've completed stage 3 and stage 4. And that's why that every other week touch base with your TA is so important, so that a lot of those questions of, well, what do we do about this? Or what do we do about this? You have a time that's already identified to meet and talk about those, or to send an email. In March, now we might be talking about transition, but my goal was that we would be talking about stage 5, the employment planning meeting, and that by April, everyone is wrapped up with discovery if you had started in January. So, and then in April, moving into job development. So this is, again, just a quick reminder of how we're going to structure our discussion groups. So the idea is that Jess is going to set up discussion rooms based on the area offices, and then you'll self-select and join whichever region you're in. And so I know some regions have smaller offices, or maybe you don't have somebody who's participating in discovery yet. So then just send a private message to Jess and we can figure out maybe which group to combine those with. But the intent is that you're connecting with people, with providers in your region, so that you can have those updates that are already just plugged in for the month. So stages 1 and 2, which we talked about last month, which includes the home visit, interviewing others, some neighborhood mapping. And I just wanted to hear from you what has stuck with you about stage 1 and 2, the home visit. What have been things that have been difficult in the last 4 weeks? What's happened around stage 1 and stage 2? Anything that surprised you?
Hey, Ashley, this is Eva from Burlington.
Hey.
Hi. So with my particular individual, I believe it's my first one. So, and now she's moving from Burlington to Mount Pleasant, or from Mount Pleasant to Burlington. So obviously we were in the neighborhood mapping section area of that. And so that looks a little different. So obviously it's my first person too. So it's just kind of like trying to like go the whole process, but then you're like, oh wait, no, let's change it up for you a little bit. So I think just trying to still do that and just kind of thinking outside the box has been a little challenge, I guess, for me.
Yes. The move always throws a wrench in things, but also might give you some great discovery activities of preparing for a move, completing a move, if that's in alignment with who she is. Yeah. Lindsay.
So I had a similar situation. My person moved right before I started.
Hi.
And so his apartment was packed in boxes when I first saw his home. So really figuring out who he was based off of the things that I saw in his apartment and his home, it was hard. So I've been I'm on phase 3/4 right now. So I keep requesting that activities and stuff be in his home so I can see the progress he's made. And also his move was a negative thing in his life. He didn't want to move from his home and into this. So he's really stuck on that. And so we talk about that a lot. And so just navigating that with him every time I'm in his apartment, it always kind of turns into like a negative conversation. So that's a big a barrier that I've been facing.
Yeah. You know, and if that move wasn't positive and that's a space that doesn't highlight him at his best, that would be an example where the home visit may not be the best. That might not be the best space to meet him in. But then you give the power always resides within the job candidate. So then you would say, okay, where are you most comfortable? And let's meet there. Or maybe you think about what are some ways that, we could make your new space feel more comfortable? And that could be a discovery activity, right? Of what are things that maybe he really enjoyed, or maybe it's getting pictures up on the wall. That could be a discovery activity of helping someone get settled in their space. Yeah, I don't know if that helps.
No, that helps a lot, because we need like one more activity too. So I think I will present that idea of, maybe putting some things on the wall or unpacking some of his belongings. So
yeah, and I would let him, kind of help guide that conversation too of, what would make this space feel more comfortable to you? What are things that you miss maybe from your previous place that are within your control to do here?
it's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Other thoughts on stage 1 and stage 2?
This is Riley. So something that I'm running into not only with my customized client is having parents help trying to figure out who we can contact to talk to. It's been very limiting. Even struggling to come up with 3 people outside of their family has been tough. So just kind of working through that and trying to help them and prompt them to come up with ideas as teachers in high school who, they remember their son had a helper, but they can't remember the specific name or if the person was there. And so it's been kind of tough just trying to come up with, their network of people, especially if their network is actually really small. So that's something I'm running into right now. And just overall running on into that with other clients too. And I don't know necessarily, I know it's not necessarily COVID, but some of mine that have come out of high school, haven't really had any interaction with anybody since. So that's tough as well. But that's just what I've noticed so far.
Yeah, great point around, we've been living in a society of isolation, and, that interviewing others piece that, if you were already isolated and then isolated to another level, it might not be as many folks. And I think that's the fluidity of discovery, right? And that for some individuals, you're going to have a lot of folks that you can talk to. In the scenarios that you're describing, if the person does have paid supports that they are spending time with, this would be a time where you'd say, okay, we've exhausted everything we can do in identifying folks who are unpaid who know a lot about this person. So let's have a conversation with folks who are their paid staff, right? And then if that's not even an option, it might just be where you only have a conversation. You could have follow-up conversations with people who were part of the home visit. So if that's parents, or eventually you have to move on. And this is kind of also one of those scenarios where you say, okay, if I can't find anybody else, let's move on and make this a red flag of, okay, this person doesn't have a lot of social capital and relationships. How can we build that also as part of this process of discovery, and connecting the person with people who have like interests, or developing kind of those relationships, even through informational interviews, potentially. I'm just spitballing. Others, if you want to jump in or have had similar experiences or ideas. Great. Things that are coming up though, this is good. Riley, does that help at all in knowing how to move forward?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, good. And that's kind of the hard part at every stage, I think, is when you identify, have I squeezed enough out of this stage to get the information I need to move on to the next stage? Or, that scenario of I need one more discovery activity, I need one more interview. The intent is that the customized discovery is also fluid enough that you can kind of go back and forth in stages. And even when you get to the end, you might say, oh, maybe it would have been beneficial to do another discovery activity in this area. So it's not just a forward moving process. You can kind of go back and forth. So, you know, if a relationship, say, develops out of this informational interview where, you know, the job candidate and this natural support end up meeting weekly after you set up a unfamiliar discovery activity, you could go back at the end and loop back and say, hey, you've been spending, you know, 1 time a week with so-and-so for 6 weeks. I'd love to pick your brain about what you've learned about your relationship with this person too, and let that give insight. So all things to think about and consider. All right, time is going way too fast. All right, let's go back to content real quick. These are just reminders. So within stage 1, 12 hours of work effort, you're doing the home visit, the neighborhood mapping. The mapping piece, I think, is really difficult right now, right? To the point that Riley was saying about our worlds are pretty isolated. So could be walks, conversations, what takes place in part of this person's community. Also, don't forget about your referrals for benefits planning, assistive technology. If you don't have internal benefits planners, you can remember connect with VR, Corey, or myself, and ideally completed in 1 to 2 weeks. Stage 2, interviewing others, 3 to 4 people, ideally, right? That's not set in stone. And conversations about who the job candidate is. So this quote came back to me this week, and it really reminded me of stage 1 and stage 2, and really the beginning of discovery, right? That our most desperate need is just human beings, right? Not even thinking about disability, but our most desperate need is to be known and accepted. And then you can stop performing and start living. And so I think one of the, and I think Christine, it was in our APSI conversation where this came up, but it really hit me just in hearing the feedback from folks that there is something so valuable about first just kind of honoring who this person is, right? And it may get in the way of setting up all the discovery activities, but first to ensure that the job candidate feels known and accepted. And I think that is more important than anything we can teach you or talk about or put in the DSR, that your first and foremost role as the employment specialist is to ensure that that job candidate feels known and accepted. And in order to get there, that's going to look different for every single human being you interact with. So it's just something that's been sticking with me the last week, and just wanted to share that to ponder. This is just a quick reminder of how the scheduling for discovery works. It's not as linear as we teach it. It should kind of go all over the place. You're not going to jump from home interview to employment, home visit to employment planning meeting. But that stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 might intertwine a little bit, right? So it doesn't have to be scheduled as linear as we talk about it.
Hey, Ash, before we move on, Sherry's got a great question that she shared in the chat. And she says, I'm feeling somewhat intrusive inviting myself into a family member's home, such as like a grandmother or a relative of somebody. I think with the presumption that for the interview, right, to interview them. Also possibly requiring an interpreter. So this particular job candidate and or their family, right, English isn't their first language. So any feedback or ideas for Sherry? I know we've been talking about it, so I think it would be good if we could hear from others, kind of what their thoughts are and kind of their guidance on that.
So one, I would say it doesn't have to happen in the home for interviewing others, right? So it could be a phone call. It could be meeting over Zoom. If it is in the person's home, you know, and for the interpreting piece, how do meetings typically take place, right? Like, I mean, you don't want it necessarily to be a formal meeting, but how does that typically take place for that individual and their family?
Maybe knowing something about their culture or something like that and doing something kind of, I don't know if they bow or if they, knowing a word or have the interpreter say, thank you for having me here. Just know something that's appropriate, that when you come in, you can kind of give them something or say something that makes them know that you are appreciative of their culture and that you are thanking them for inviting them into your home. So kind of just relating the knowledge that you understand, a little bit about that. It's always a good idea to kind of have that in your back pocket.
A lot of listening, right? So particularly just, once you are in that space of making sure that we're doing more listening than talking, and taking in the information. I think the other cultural piece is when that culture differs from our own, and our own set of values in some scenarios, and just kind of knowing how we're taking in that information, and kind of going from there. It looks like, Adisha, I've met with the job candidate in the office, so maybe more information around that. Like, did you meet with them in the office because that was where it was most comfortable?
I have met my job candidate in the office quite a few times. I guess it's a matter of working with them in the community or in the family. If I go to another family home setting, if they would speak fluent English, I'm not sure. And then also trying to have an interpreter with me so we can have good communication. So that's right. And then, as I said, I felt somewhat intrusive, inviting myself. Well, first I was seeking out a family member, could be a grandmother, whatever. Feeling intrusive, inviting myself in, to speak about the grandson, cousin. I'm specifically speaking of a Hispanic family, which they're usually be very strong, family influential. So that was a question of me. I can seek it out some more, but being able to communicate. My job candidate does speak some English. He also has a speech impediment. So sometimes it's kind of hard to understand him if we were to have a somewhat fluid conversation. I guess another question is too, we mentioned of being in his home as a familiar activity is like making tacos. Okay, so my question is, who's purchasing the items for the tacos? Am I, feeling intrusive? Okay, well, I'm gonna come in, let's make tacos for me, but you need to purchase all the food, the ingredients, etc. So that's where I guess I'm feeling somewhat intrusive. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but just wanting feedback, and keeping a good correspondence with the family and with my job candidate, and but not feeling I'm stepping over some boundaries. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions, and insight. And to the point about like grandma and going to her house, and maybe if the job candidate goes there, regularly, could you all go together, right? So that interviewing others doesn't have to be a formal sit down. If the job candidate goes there regularly, or maybe, hey, like, could we, if you're going to your grandma's house, do you mind if I go with you? And you could have a casual conversation, and, that the intent is really, I just want to get to know who this person is. And I know that you're one of the most important people in his life. And I just want to, would it be possible for me to just come and spend time with y'all when you're meeting? I think is helpful. Or if you have an interpreter service that you're currently using, ask for their guidance too in connecting. Find experts who know a lot about that culture as well that could give you insights. I also wrote down, we need to spend a community of practice just talking about culture, and how do we connect with cultures that are different than our own. Other thoughts? in regards to Sherry's question. It looks like Justin, if they aren't comfortable with a home visit, asking them if they would be okay with meeting you at their favorite hangout of theirs. Yeah, great.
Well, I think as it relates to the cooking activity, right? If we ever engage in a cooking activity with somebody, I think kind of to Ashley's point, it's not about, will you cook this for me? Right? It's like, are you cooking for yourself or your family this week or next week? And can I join you? Right? So to frame it to be a little more natural, or as it's kind of naturally occurring right in their life or in the environment. So if that makes sense, because right. So hopefully that makes sense and that helps.
Yes. Yeah. The idea is to do what is already occurring, as opposed to like, okay, to making tacos. And I think that's one thing is a system that would be a lot easier if we kind of had this pocket of money that could be used for discovery activities where the provider pays for the items to make something, to set up a unfamiliar activity. That's not within our purview right now. I think a cool thing I've seen regional dollars be used for that, so that providers would request from their region a small pot of money or incentive dollars that could be used as kind of discretionary funds to cover the cost for those things. But otherwise, yeah, lean into what's already occurring. If they're making dinner, it doesn't necessarily have to be about the specific recipe of just, if he always helps with dinner, would it be possible to join? And can you bring anything, right? Like, it's okay to say, at least me and I feel like, and within Griffin-Hammis, we would lean into that and say, okay, if you're inviting me to dinner, what could I bring? Is there anything that, to also build that trust and rapport?
Well, and to Tora's point too, that I know that that's really actually important in this particular job candidate's culture, and many others, right? But that when you arrive at the house, that you bring something with you. So, right, that you share. So that's cool feedback. We can keep working on that too, Sherry. It's really good questions.
Excellent. Yeah. And I'd love, that to do follow-ups on those things too, where you can come back to the next community of practice and say, this is something that we did and it worked or it didn't work, so that we can all learn from those experiences. Great. Anything else before we?
In regards to Sherry's question, couldn't you just ask, I mean, if part of what the person does is cook, can you just ask, would it be okay if I just came and observed you cook the meal? And then once the meal is ready, I mean, if you feel like you're intruding upon their meal time, then you can say, you know what, I've got my information and I'll just leave now. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much emotional intelligence and in our work, right? Of every scenario is different and kind of deciding what feels comfortable and what doesn't feel comfortable in the moment and making those decisions. So absolutely. Any other thoughts? Go back into stage 3. All right, so stage 3, I think, is where things start feeling really hard as far as discovery, because it feels uncomfortable, and it's kind of doing things in a way that we haven't necessarily done them in the past. And so it's a considerable amount of time. So the idea is that you pick 4 to 6 task-based activities that require completion of multiple tasks within one activity. And so the activities are identified based on what we've learned in stage 1 and stage 2 about the person. And that can be really hard to do when we don't know a lot about who the person is, even though we've completed stage 1 and stage 2, right? So when you're identifying job candidates for the first time that you're learning, that's why we always try to say, you know, identify someone who has lots of people who are invested in seeing them to success. And then so you kind of get the full process and then connect with someone who might be a little bit more difficult. But either way, it's fine. So 4 to 6 task-based activities. You definitely want to pull the team together, meaning team of Jess, Corey, myself, the VR counselor, and brainstorm around what discovery activities might look like. And we always want to complete them in the community, particularly unfamiliar. Ideally, no day hab, no vocational settings that are predetermined, but really just based on the person. So why do we do discovery activities? What's the point, right? Other than us saying that this is part of the process. So the idea is that you're collecting information about skills, ecological fit, and conditions of employment, right? So conditions, again, are the things that ideally I have to be successful. So that might be a flexible schedule. It might be a positive work environment. It might be making sure that I have some flexibility to be creative in my work. And the goal is that we want to answer, how is the person best supported and how does the person learn best? And so the intent of discovery activities, again, is not to measure, but to just continue to take in information. And so the familiar discovery activities are intended to be comfortable, easier to set up, right? Because that's already occurring for the person. The unfamiliar activities are more difficult because oftentimes we are building new relationships to set those up. So when you're thinking again about familiar discovery activities, this is a recap of last week, but what does the job candidate do throughout the day? What's already naturally occurring? What's actionable? So going for a walk would really be an extension of the home visit or neighborhood mapping. You might still do it in this stage, but it's not going to be covered in your discovery activities. A familiar discovery activity might be planting a garden, taking care of their garden. It might be cooking, right? What are things that are already occurring that we can capture and take pictures, but have that conversation about permission to take pictures as well. Unfamiliar discovery activities are related. They're familiar or they're less familiar, right? But oftentimes we are building those unfamiliar discovery activities based, again, on what information we've already collected. So the employment specialist assists with activities as needed, right? So if this is unfamiliar, it's possible that the job candidate isn't going to know how to do the unfamiliar task, right? But hopefully in the familiar task, you've learned a little bit about what supports are provided, and you've gained some information about how is this person best supported by their staff, by their parents. If somebody mows the lawn regularly, that might be a familiar task, but you, or familiar activity, but you're observing how that person is supported in completing that task. And you take that information and infuse it into an unfamiliar activity, right? But throughout that process, you're learning how the person is best supported. And we capture that information in the discovery staging record, because then in turn, when they find a job and a career path, you pull that information into their job coaching supports. So also, this is a really unique space to pull in assistive technology during this stage. And I know that that's very different in kind of a traditional VR setting where we would think about pulling in assistive technology once the job has been secured. However, if we pull in assistive technology into discovery activities, it gives us more insight of what this person can do and accomplish, right? So if I have a new or an unfamiliar discovery activity And I noticed that the person, maybe it would be a benefit to use a twist tie that they could hold on to instead of a rag, or instead of using their finger to type. Like, what assistive technology could we pull in that gives us insight to show us this individual can do much more with the support of assistive technology, as opposed to when we don't fold in assistive technology, right? So again, it's a different place to pull in that support, but it also gives us this idea of, oh, this person can rock at doing X, Y, and Z when they have that assistive tech support. So here's an example. I love this picture of Ruth and Carrie. And so Carrie Griffin is on the left, and he started Griffin-Hammis with Dave Hammis, and he's meeting with Ruth. And Ruth is someone who experienced a lot of facility-based employment in her life, and was someone who didn't smile a lot, and stacked hangers, I believe, if I remember right. And so she wanted to cook. And in stage 1 and stage 2, what they had learned was that Ruth really wanted to cook, and she wanted to make pizza. And so Carrie is basically a chef on the side. So it also folds into his interest, right? So he could teach her because he knows how to make fresh dough. So what they found, Ruth is smiling, she's loving, this cooking experience. They toss the dough up in the air, she's smiling more than anyone's ever seen. And what they found out through this discovery activity is that Ruth really doesn't have an emerging vocational theme in cooking. She just really wanted to have some ownership of what she was having for dinner, right? So it's also possible, I tell you that because discovery activities may lead to confirming a vocational pattern, or they may deny that vocational pattern and say, this isn't a theme. And that's just as valuable, right? So this would have been an unfamiliar activity for Ruth. Let's see, I went in the wrong direction. This is kind of just a visual example of kind of the process that we're going through from stage or with discovery activities, right? So even in stage 1 and stage 2, we're looking at what's familiar. What does the job candidate already do? So we're taking in all this information. We don't really know what we're going to do with it yet, but we're looking for patterns, consistencies. And then we want to see the familiar in action, right? So this is where those familiar discovery activities start folding in. We want to see seeing and doing and observing what is known, what already occurs. And then we build on that. And so this is where our linear process gets a little messy. So to get to unfamiliar activities, oftentimes we need to do some informational interviews, or we look and say, who are natural contacts that we already have? So say, for example, if somebody loves motors and cars, I want to look at the team, counselor, employment specialist team, family members, and say, who do we know who knows anything about cars? Who on this community of practice knows anything about cars? And let's connect, right? So I remember learning from a VR counselor that he was an intricate professional woodworker on the side. If we are working with someone who also has that interest, the unfamiliar activity could be connecting with that VR counselor or a person that he knows who's a woodworker for an unfamiliar discovery activity. It doesn't have to be at a formal business. It could be the shade tree mechanic. It could be someone in the community who also knows a lot about X, Y, and Z. If you have anyone who loves dogs, Marsha is a dog expert. You have one as part of this team, right? So looking at our own vocational interest, tap into who's part of that team. So we use informational interviews to help get us connected with the unfamiliar. And then we want to see the unfamiliar in action. So then we set up unfamiliar activities based on what we've learned that used to be unfamiliar, but's becoming familiar. Does that make sense? And then we look at the consistencies, the patterns, the skills, and that helps us get to our emerging vocational theme. And then we use additional informational interviews to confirm that vocational theme, if that makes sense. So, but that's kind of how we get to those patterns. Oops, my happy little mouse. All right, so at the end of stage 3, this is what we want to answer, right? So if you're connecting with Jess or Corey and you're like, oh, I'm moving on to stage 4, you should be able to answer these questions with detail. So what are the tasks that the job candidate completed and beyond entry level, right? Like how did we also get that person outside of their comfort zone to try something new and novel and different? What are the skills that the job candidate demonstrated? What supports does the job candidate benefit from? So again, how does the person learn best? How is the person best supported? What are work culture and conditions that would be really important to take into consideration? So is it a small environment, a quiet environment, an environment where the person has the ability to use headphones? What does that look like? And then what are their personal attributes that are important to work? Problem solving, creativity. Any person who experiences a disability is a natural problem solver. That could be listed, I think, literally on every person that we work as a skill in every person that we work with, because they've been navigating the world in their life in a world that wasn't set up to make life easier for them, right? So everybody's a problem solver. Lean into what are those natural attributes of who that person is. And then going back to real quick, unfamiliar, Alice last year noted the importance of Instagram. So if you are an Instagrammer, connect with people. People show their area of expertise on Instagram all the time. Send folks a note on Instagram. That's a great way to connect for an informational interview, the potential for an unfamiliar activity. Get creative. It doesn't have to be a formal phone call.
Cedar Rapids had a lot of luck too. The Cedar Rapids team utilized Facebook and some of those groups tied to a passion or an interest or a hobby, and reached out to folks too, again, for informational interviews that often turned into discovery activities. They had a lot of luck with that too. So just know that's a good resource. And we've got some great questions in the chat that I think I bet folks run into. So let's share this. Lindsay asked, the individual she's working with is stuck on a particular theme. And it's a theme that needs, she says, it's a theme that needs a lot of experience and a degree. I've tried to get him to think outside the box and open. He says he is, but he kind of continues to go back to this theme. So I said, that's common. Good job leaning into it. What's the theme? What's he most interested in? She shares radio broadcasting. So that's the one that he's really excited about. But he does have an AA in graphic design and a bachelor in liberal arts, right? So he's got some other maybe themes or interests around computers, marketing, and technical support. Those seem to align very nicely with the radio broadcasting. And I think, you could possibly take that broader, right? I don't know if it's entertainment or that could be a lot of things, but I think my question would be, where else do those type of things happen, right? What other businesses or what other people share those same themes, right? So it could be radio, but where else are people using their voice, essentially, right? To entertain, I guess. And I don't know, I think I might kind of push back too, and especially if we're taking it broader, that I imagine that there's probably things within that theme or jobs that people do that don't require a degree and or extensive experience.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the unlearning of, we can oftentimes kind of halt our own creativity because we know, okay, the positions that I'm thinking of in radio and broadcasting require a degree. So if we flip that and just say, who else could we just talk to? I don't have to think about the degree piece right now, but let's just go talk to other people, as Jess mentioned, who have that interest. So do I know anyone at KWWL? Do I know anyone at the newspaper, or who does sports announcing? Or I'm even thinking of Iris here in Des Moines.
Right.
You know, and I'm trying to think of that.
I know. I'm thinking of our friend Laura Gibson at Sissel, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know the connection. I know
with Iris. What's the Iris acronym?
right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So Iris is the radio station for the blind.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I actually worked with an individual who is blind, and we ended up doing an auto editing position for him. And he's been there about 3 years now. But sometimes when we're doing, this happens a lot where people get stuck on an idea of what they want to do. And radio broadcasting is a good example of that. But then thinking, is it actually radio broadcasting the person wants to do, or is it the environment of radio broadcasting that draws their interest? And so looking beyond that, with my client, he would have a great broadcasting voice as well, but he wanted to do more of the back end of things. And so he does all their audio editing and that type of thing now. And he's also a production manager for Iris. So he takes on both roles. But it was identifying, was it really that in, the radio broadcasting piece of it, or was it behind the scene things that really were more of interest? So, kind of looking at it that way, looking at the broader picture of it, and then finding out, what does this individual need to have skill wise? Or is there parts of that job, a certain job in that area that potentially draws interest as well? So.
Yeah. And that reminds me of, when Dr. Hall would say broadening the confusion. This is what he's talking about, right? Of broadening our own confusion about what positions exist, right? And that if we get out of that idea of thinking in job descriptions, because naturally that happens to all of us, but if we have those conversations and just say, tell me about what occurs here. Tell me about, this is where your informational interview skills come in, and you're just collecting information. So Alice mentioned Radio Garage, sports events. If you just reach out and have conversations around what takes place in broadcasting. Tora has great examples as well. Personally, I went and got a journalism degree. I thought, oh, this will be great. I hated the field, but I love presenting and I love telling people stories. And that was the piece that was important for me. And that was led to my interest in broadcasting, right? So I can, I still love the news, but there are things under there for everybody, right? And different interests, and figuring out where that comes from. Or maybe it's the announcing piece, or being at events, or, there are people who announce theater productions for small little black box theaters, right? They introduce the show every night. So all sorts of different things. Yeah, great. Awesome.
Great.
All right. Let's move to our discussion groups, I think, to carve out time for that. So let's I'm going to pull up what we're going to work on. So I know that not everybody has someone that they're working with, so we're going to use an example. So I believe this is in the Google Drive, Jess, if they click on it.
Yeah, let me pull that one more time. But yes, it is.
And so we're going to take 10 minutes. I'm going to go over the introductory information for Bill so that you guys can kind of just jump in and start brainstorming. So Bill is someone who's 21 years old. He's never had a job. He recently left school and now attends Day Activity Center for people with developmental disabilities. He goes to the group home where staff knows him pretty well, but mostly through the services they offer him: cooking, cleaning, group home outings. He has very minimal contact with his family, and they have not responded to your calls. From a few visits and conversations with Bill and his staff, you've learned that his interests are in professional wrestling, playing music on the CD, with CDs or radio, gadgets like flashlights, all-in-one tools, mini lamps, clip lamps, mini voice recorders. We would like to learn enough about not only Bill's interests, but also what skills he has that might be related to these interest areas. What tasks he can do to complete certain tasks, and think about the vocational themes. So this is what the goal in the next 10 minutes is: think about Bill and his interests, and then start thinking about what are maybe familiar activities that he could do and unfamiliar activities that he could do that are related to professional wrestling, playing music, and gadgets, right? So those aren't necessarily the themes, they're emerging patterns. They're not vocational themes yet. And just start thinking about what activities could take place. And then, so go ahead and click on your, on where's the, what's the,
I think under breakouts, you should see your rooms by regional office, I hope. Yes.
okay. And then let's make sure, like, yeah, let's come back in 10 minutes, and then we have 5 minutes for a quick wrap up, and then Vienna has a few announcements as well. Important announcement from Mary Jackson, who only has a few minutes. Also, real quick, in March, we are scheduled during spring break, which I know a lot of folks are going to be gone during that week. So March 23rd from 9:45 to 11:15, I think would be a benefit to change that. And then Mary Jackson can also join us for the whole time. So we could confirm that that will be all about transition.
The 23rd, so change from the 16th to the 23rd.
Yeah, to March 23rd, 9:45 to 11:15.
Okay.
Is that going to be recorded?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, if somebody reminds me, make sure I don't forget.
All right, Mary Jackson, I cannot see you, but the floor is yours.
Sure. So thank you. This is Mary. It sounded like you guys had some questions maybe about providing customized discovery for a student that might be entering a 4+ program. So the guidance that we are giving on this is customized discovery for our high school students really is focused on their last year of high school. So for some, it's going to be their senior year, or traditionally 12th grade. For others, that could be extended out a little bit further depending on what their plan looks like through their IEP process with their school district. So if you have a student, let's say, that starts their senior year and we have customized discovery getting started, and then maybe the team decides last minute or later on in the year to extend out that IEP to go into a 4+ program, that's a conversation then that you need to have with that team to decide what the next steps are for that student. In some cases, it might be appropriate to continue on with customized discovery, and in other cases, it may not be. And a lot of that's going to be dependent upon what that 4+ program looks like. Some students might be leaving the area, some might be staying in their high school. That's a conversation that should happen on a case-by-case basis. So there's no blanket response to say it's a yes or a no. It's a let's have a conversation, because we have to figure out how these services would look and what that would work going forward. I would remind you though, when it comes to customized discovery, you're going to do, and I'm still learning all this wording for this, but you're going to do kind of that first 3 months, get to that DSR. After that, you're moving into job development. So keeping in mind that the soonest we can close a student is 90 days after high school graduation. So if a student goes on an extended IEP, they don't graduate high school until the end of their IEP or when they exit. So that student could remain in status 22 for a while with our agency. That doesn't mean we're necessarily paying at that point, because when you're in 22 to be stabilized, that's when the waiver would pick up at that point in time. So that's a conversation that you have to have multiple people at the table for, and make sure everybody's on board and understanding what that process would look like for that individual student. I know that's a lot of information in like a really short period of time that I just had to say. So questions?
That is why
We're recording,
I
right?
used to say it, because we didn't have much time for me to say it in such a nice, a concise
Not
way.
recording. Hey, Mary, you brought up something important about the about long-term supports and kind of waiver funding in place. What does that look like for high school students? You know, does that need to be in place? What if they're on a wait list? Talk to us a little bit about that guidance.
Sure. So early planning is huge, as we all know that work with any students in high school. Just so you guys know, with the new IEP system, Achieve, that's coming out, there are prompts that have been put in place that we've worked with the Department of Ed to make sure teachers are getting prompted when we're talking about these long-term supports to get students connected early to the waiver. We're not going to cut somebody off of services just because they're not connected to the waiver. We do have services in place to continue so that student can continue to be successful, knowing they're on a waiting list for a waiver. So obviously our staff would still follow all those policies we have in place for that. But we still wouldn't close that individual until 90 days after high school graduation. So there may be some exceptions that are going to have to come into play if you start getting higher on the units, like if you start reaching your max units before they've actually graduated high school. And if we are still paying at that point in time for job coaching, you'd have to be mindful of that. And that's all spelled out in those policies.
Thank you.
I'll say I don't know what the situation is in other areas, but in our area, it's really, really tricky with transition because with Discovery, we only have so many providers that can do it now. And I have a girl who's been waiting 8 months. She's on an 8-month waiting list. And she still hasn't received the service yet. It hasn't even started yet, but we're at 8 months now. So planning for high school in that regard has been like, she's not in high school anymore, but that's where it's really tricky if you need to be putting in a referral a year in advance and you don't necessarily know what's going to be happening. I just wanted to throw that out there as as kind of a barrier right now.
Yep. And my understanding, and Ashley and Jess, correct me if I'm wrong, but the agreement, if we're working with a CRP who's agreeing to provide customized discovery, isn't it that they are supposed to be able to accept the referral within 3 months? I believe that was listed off on the materials.
Yeah, it's listed in the materials. The reality is, I mean, providers are experiencing a workforce shortage like none other. So, I mean, I think the idea is if you can't accept that person within 3 months, that you would say, we have a waiting list right now, or if you streamline that, but you have a room full of providers that can give you feedback on that. And maybe that's something we also talk about in March, of the reality of being able to do that.
We have had to put people on a waiting list at WCGC, and it's something in 50 years we've never had to do before. That's how bad it is for CRPs, our workforce right now.
Thanks for sharing, Anita.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I want to be conscious of everyone's time. It is 11:15, so if you need to go,